Welcome back, everybody, to What Really Matters. I'm Tablet Deputy Editor Jeremy Stern with you in Los Angeles. I'm here, as always, with Walter Russell Mead, Tablet news writer, Global View columnist at The Wall Street Journal, and distinguished fellow at Hudson. Let's start with this week's news, picked again from The Scroll, Tablet's daily afternoon newsletter. First story of the week. The UN Refugee Agency for Palestinians, several of whose employees cheered Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel, claims that it will have to stop delivering humanitarian aid unless Israel agrees to provide fuel to Gaza, just weeks after announcing that Hamas was stealing fuel and medical equipment from the agency's compound. The agency, which received $344 million in funding from the U.S. in 2022, said it will be forced to cease operations if it does not receive more fuel immediately. Israel is currently allowing the delivery of food, water, and medicine to Gaza, but draws the line at fuel, which it fears will be diverted to support Hamas's war effort. So the eminent UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in the Near East, Walter, is what it does and doesn't do news or faux news?
I'd say it's old news. If there's anybody around who doesn't understand that UNRWA has long since more or less been absorbed by various Palestinian resistance movements, they haven't been paying attention. It's not necessarily, in the abstract, a terrible thing. An organization that's going to be serving a population of refugees is over time going to draw a lot of its people from that group. But it is definitely true that over the years, UNRWA has really been assimilated into what you might call the resistance camp.
All right, our second story. An overwhelming majority of Israeli Arabs oppose Hamas's attacks on Israel, according to a recent poll. The survey found that 80% of Israeli Arabs oppose the attacks, 85% oppose Hamas's kidnapping of civilians, 66% support Israel's right to defend itself, and 50% believe the attacks were, quote, contrary to the values of Islam. Arabs make up about 21% of Israel's population, and at least 18 Israeli Arabs were killed in the October 7th attacks. The attitude of Arab Israelis, the vast majority of whom are Muslim, stands in contrast to the attitude of young Americans. According to an October 23rd Harvard-Harris poll, half of Americans aged 18 to 34 believe the Hamas attacks, quote, can be justified by the grievances of Palestinians, close quote. Walter, is all this news or faux news?
I'm always suspicious of polls that ask very specific questions. I remember once during all the big fights we used to have over the Contras in Nicaragua, Kissinger was looking it up and he found a poll that something like only 10% of Americans could tell that the difference between Nicaragua and Norway. So I wouldn't, I think there's a lot of hand-wringing going on around right now, and certainly some of the signs we've seen of quite vicious and bitter anti-Semitism erupting in all kinds of places where certainly all of us hoped you wouldn't see that, have drawn a lot of people into a sense of real despair and fear. I think on top of that, a statistic like the one in that poll, just fills people with a sense of doom. I think we should wait and see. It's interesting that older Americans who tend to have been around maybe a little bit better informed, have seen these things come and go. There, the support for Israel is really pretty strong. So, yeah, there's a kind of anti-establishment, don't take things for granted among young people. But let's also not forget that thanks in part to COVID, this is the least educated group of young people that the United States has seen in a generation or more. It's not their fault. They didn't do this, but they've been deprived of key years of schooling. So I think we have to wait and see how it all works out. But it's not good news, but I'm not really sure yet that it's big news.
On the point about the opinions of Muslim Arabs who live in Israel, I remember in a much older episode of What Really Matters when we were talking about the Scottish national movement and how the one group of opinions that they never seemed to take into account were Scottish people who live in England and benefit from union. And it kind of reminds me of, the one group of people whose opinions about either Zionism or just the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in general, the ones you never hear about are the Arab Muslims who live in Israel and presumably benefit enough from their lives in Israel to not want to move out.
Well, I don't know about not wanting to move. There'd be a lot of reasons why you wouldn't want to move out, including this is where all your family lives and everybody who you know. But it is, I don't think we should romanticize how happy Arab Israelis are. And I think, there have been some pretty troubling signs over the years of an increasing rather than a decreasing alienation. So let's not whitewash that. But at the same time, you can really, really, really not like Netanyahu and the Zionist right, and also really not like masked paragliders who might at any moment drop in and massacre you and your family.
All right, fair enough. Final story of the week. Senior White House officials have been leading ethnically segregated listening sessions to reassure staffers that they are supported, according to a report in Politico. The news follows several reports in the Huffington Post last week about White House diplomatic and national security staffers feeling stifled by the Biden administration's public support for Israel, with one administration official blaming Biden's stance on the fact that his inner circle is, quote, not at all diverse. To address those concerns, the White House has in recent days held segregated small group listening sessions for Jewish staffers on the one hand and Muslim, Arab, and Palestinian staffers on the other, as well as several larger meetings, quote, featuring in-depth discussions about the crisis and its effect on the lives of White House aides, close quote. Walter, news or faux news?
Horrible news. But not so much horrible. The reason it's horrible is how did all of these whiny, immature people get jobs working in senior positions? Of course, some of them are not particularly senior, I think we can assume. But really, I hate to break this to any of our listeners who may not be aware of it, but your boss is not your mother. Your boss is not your therapist. Your job is not a place you go to feel good. It's a place you go to do the job. Particularly when you're working for a democratic government, your job as a government official is to do what you're told. You're not there to make policy. You are there, unless you're extremely senior, to execute policy and to execute it as well as you can. Now, there may come times when you really feel that a policy that you're asked to execute is immoral. Well, in that case, you can ask to change your assignment. You can resign as a last resort. But you really have no business saying, I, as an employee who no one ever elected to anything, have the right to tell the elected representatives of the American people what they can and can't do. So I'm afraid if anybody like that was in my office, I would say, well, I'm really sorry that you're not here, but it probably won't feel so bad to you that you're fired. Now, did I sound enough like a mean old boomer?
All right, that does it for the news this week. Let's have the big conversation. So, zooming out a bit, Walter, or quite a bit, I should say, it's clear that there are very